Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 31 of the PowettPlay Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Shannon, and as always, I'm joined by Kieran Powell. How are you, Kai?
I'm good, John. How are you?
Yes, we're over the moon to have a special guest with us today, the Dean of Faculty of Sport at the University of West Indies, Dr. Mansingh. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Good. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm really pleased to have you on board. I just wanted to sort of start by, how you got into, to sport and in medicine, really, and, what was sort of the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, well, I mean, growing up in Jamaica, well, I can tell you, I was born in Canada. I'm a Kingstonian, so I was born in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, but lived in Kingston, Jamaica. And the reason we got to Jamaica was because my father was in Canada for 13 years, hadn't seen cricket for 13 years, and casually asked if there was a job available at University of the West Indies. And we moved to Jamaica for 2 years and never left because of cricket. Now, I used to play cricket in Jamaica. Of course, at that time, West Indies cricket was at a phenomenal level. And, the aspiration of every young West Indian boy was to play for the West Indies. Also in the back of my head was that, I have to get into medicine. That's something that was my passion as well. In fact, at the age of 11, it was orthopedic surgery that I wanted to do. So it was, God knows how that happened. But anyhow, so there I am playing cricket. And then I remember once in an under-19, Jamaica under-19 trials, I was sitting down talking to a friend of mine and telling him that, I think I'm going to have to give up cricket because I want to become a doctor. And he said, well, I might have to give up studies because I want to be a cricketer. And the year I got into medicine, he became the youngest man to ever represent Jamaica at a national cricket.
Yeah.
And when I finished medicine, he actually made his test debut and then went on to become a West Indies captain, Jimmy Adams. So, and so there I was, playing club cricket. And suddenly I became a doctor and people started treating me a bit differently. And, it was Doc, how can you do this? And Doc, can you do that? And the same guys who were my teammates before are now calling me Doc. And strange. So what then happened is they started coming with their medical problems. Well, of course, I went on to do orthopedic surgery, which is another 7 years. And that was all good. And I got more and more involved in West Indies cricket because I guess, the guys knew me and then they started trusting my medicine. But when I got involved more into that, I realized that I probably need to specialize in sports medicine as well.
Right.
I went on to do a master's in sports medicine out of Australia. And so I became an orthopedic surgeon who had a specialist in sports medicine as a primary sports medicine physician. But if I could, I'd tell you that there's been a privilege to be involved in the two regional organizations that work. That's Cricket West Indies and University of the West Indies.
Yeah.
So I was able to start a master's program to produce sports medicine physicians and sports physiotherapists. And we at the university have been able to do that and serve cricket as well. So there you are.
Right. So when you got involved with cricket, and you mentioned at the start then, what was your role at the very early stages with Cricket West Indies?
Well, I think I started off just by looking after players, and then Jamaica Cricket Association made me their team doctor. And I was looking after them at the first class level. And then in 1999, the West Indies Cricket Board started, putting a lot more emphasis on my looking after their players.
Right.
And I was looking after them. And I think in 2002, I'd become a co-chair of the West Indies Cricket Board medical panel.
Right.
And then
Okay.
as chief medical officer for about 15, 17 years or something like that.
So you mentioned there about being part of the medical panel. What sort of roles would that entail?
Well, so medicine in cricket was something that came on very late. I recall people saying that other sports have had team doctors and medical structures for a very, very long time. But in West Indies cricket, they set up a medical panel. And then, as I said, in 2002, when I became co-chair, the idea was to set up a structure that could look after our players, that could look after fitness needs and so on. These are all new terms and new concepts in cricket.
Yeah.
In fact, we had a World Cup of cricket in 2007 in the Caribbean, and there was no guidance from the ICC in terms of what medicine should be. And in 2008, for the first time, the ICC set up a medical panel, of which I was an inaugural member. So I was able to, from that point, to help the ICC with their own, policy making and so on. I still sit as a member of the Medical Council now, but for the ICC. But the point is, all of this evolution of medicine in cricket is a fairly recent phenomenon. And from the West Indies perspective, from a board level, we got involved from 2002 in trying to put a structure together.
Right. And you mentioned there about getting together. So would other countries around, or would it be a case of sharing ideas and sort of talking through medicine in terms of cricket?
Yeah, indeed. So there's an internal part and external part. The
Right.
internal part, of course, is that we're something like 14 different countries, six
Yeah.
different regional boards. And the difference, of course, in the Caribbean is that these are independent countries, or most are independent. And therefore, to practice from one country to the other, you need special licensing and so on. So you're dealing with a different sort of environment than the other countries, which are solitary countries with one sort of system. Then there's the external part that you mentioned, which is having a set of people who look after the same cohort, in this case, cricket,
Yeah.
who then can share their ideas and so on. So we've had many conferences. There's this thing called the World Congress of Sport and Science, World Congress of Science and Medicine in Cricket, which meets every 4 years. And we've had many other conferences, which has brought all of the sports doctors and scientists together in cricket to share ideas. And of course, that's now taken off in a big way. You have lots of research projects and so on. But it
Yeah.
all started off with a small group that just shared ideas. And so one of the early things that we've seen, for example, is the epidemic of stress fractures in fast bowlers.
Right.
And I
Okay.
think that's one of the successes is because we've been able to reduce that through research and intervention. But a lot of that sharing of ideas was, from that infancy of medicine in cricket.
Yeah. How did, when you brought it in and you said obviously it was new to the sport, how did the players take to it?
There are two or three things that you have to consider. One is that, of course, there were no sports medicine doctors in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So when I actually did it in Australia, I said this is something we owe our athletes, not something we offer, something we owe our athletes,
Yeah.
because we have such high-level athletes in the Caribbean that we've got to provide that sort of medicine for them.
Yeah.
You can imagine that in the early days, there was a lot of uneasiness because they'd never known of sports medicine doctors in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And then as young democracies who just attained independence in the last, generation,
Yeah.
we do have this thing in the Caribbean called accent and confidence.
Okay.
And what that means is that if somebody tells you something in a Caribbean accent, you take it skeptically. But if somebody says it in a foreign accent, it's gospel, whether it's true or not. And so we did go through that thing of having to get the confidence of players. Luckily, what happened is there were some very big cases where players kind of rubbished our diagnosis and rubbished our treatment plans and went overseas, only to find out that the exact same thing was said to them. And I think that built a bit of confidence amongst the players.
Yeah.
Now, you're never going to satisfy anybody 100% of the times.
No.
Even in some of the most developed medical countries, you have players from, say, England going off to Germany for treatment and players from Canada going off to UK and all sorts of things because everybody's thinking that their own system is not the ideal system.
Yeah.
So we had to put together a structure that was ideal for our circumstances and could be bought into by the players. And I'm happy to say that I think by and large we succeeded with that.
Yeah.
Remember also that at that time we had no money in medical health for cricketers.
Right.
They had no insurance, the board had to pay for it. It wasn't very well funded. All of that has improved significantly as time has gone on.
So where you mentioned that, where did it come from then?
Well, before the West Indies Cricket Board would just pay for players. There were no contracts or anything like that in those days.
Right.
And if something happened and listen, if something happened on tour, they'd look after you. But once the tour was finished, you're kind of at the mercy of the regional boards and whatever else, right? So that structure came together very quickly where we had a system where if you got injured, not only would you be looked after on tour, but there'd be follow-up. There'd be people looking after your rehab. There'd be somebody checking in on you.
Right.
And this is all 20 odd years ago. And that was footed by the West Indies Cricket Board. Fast forward 20 years and now all the players have medical insurance. They have coverage for not only them, but their families as well, I think, by and large, if they pay for it. So that has come a far way, and it's been buying not just from the players, but from corporate sector as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, initially it was all footed by the Cricket West Indies, or the West Indies Cricket Board, as it was called then. And then, as I said, there was the mismatch of players wanting to go overseas to get the exact same treatment they could get at home. And we had to then put into place that, if you can get the treatment at home, then we're going to treat you at home.
Yeah.
And if you wish to go away, that's your right, absolute right. We'd never deny you of that. But as far as funding is concerned, we would just foot what would be paid for locally, and you'd have to rest. So that was
Right.
it.
Okay.
And then the last thing was we got a lot of good networking with people overseas, top doctors overseas, who themselves recognized that the treatment was similar in both places. So they too encouraged players to say, hey guys, you do get that at home, so you can look
Yeah.
after. And the last thing to mention is, especially where I am from, which is Jamaica, we do have a lot of high-level athletes in other sports
Yeah, of
who
course.
started buying into being treated locally as well. So that helped a lot. So our top cricketers would talk to our top sports and realize that, hey, we're being treated at home, or the home doctors can help us with whatever we need to get. And I think they bought into that as well.
When you first got into the role, did you have a long-term objective in mind?
I think the objective was two things. One was to provide care to every West Indian cricketer, because, as I said, a lot of them were left to their own vices in the early days. And the second thing was to have a structure that would outlive me.
Yeah.
Now, you could argue that the structures will change and have changed, but the truth is, for the day, I think we had the best structure we could at that point with the funding and the
Yeah.
resources. Now we have a lot more doctors, a lot more physios. In fact, with the franchise system, we're the ones that insisted that there be a full-time paid physiotherapist per team and that there be doctors associated. But what we insisted was that there be a sports physiotherapist associated with the teams. Not all teams got that. And I will point out that even now, happily in cricket, they recognize that they are specialists. You've got sports medicine doctors, sports medicine physiotherapists, that's who you should go to. But in many of the other sports we have, and even at the highest level, they still go for people who are not specialists because they may be personal friends or they may be offering services for free. As you find teams traveling with, as I joke, that they'll go to a dermatologist for sports injuries, or they'll go to a gynecologist for sports injuries, or they'll go to a physiotherapist who's a general physiotherapist, ignoring sports physiotherapist, because they don't recognize that there is actually a specialty called sports medicine.
Yeah.
That has changed, and there's more recognition now, and that's something I'm very happy about.
You mentioned there about the teams having to have the sports therapist and the sports, all that sort of stuff. Where does the education come from a cricketing perspective then?
Yeah. So there are two things. The University of the West Indies, of course, as I told you, since 2006 has been offering courses for doctors.
Right.
And then from 2008 for physiotherapists.
Yeah.
To specialize in sports medicine.
Right.
So that program alone has produced somewhere between 72 and 78, over the years, specialists in those fields.
Yeah.
But we're not the only game in town. We have a lot of our people who go overseas and specialize as well. So we've had a lot going to the USA, we've had a lot going to Canada, a lot going to the UK, who've come back home and become part of the system as well.
Yeah.
In the end, what we're asking is that, you have that specialist training. Then there's cricket specificity. So you could be a specialist in sport, but cricket has its own nuances. And happily, as time has gone on, we have more and more people experienced in cricket. That has made a big difference. And now what's happening, which I'm quite happy about, is a lot of our doctors and physios are being taken by foreign leagues. So, these leagues have sprung up all over the world. And a lot of our practitioners are being called by other teams just to, I would call it a recognition of what their capabilities are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I suppose players getting picked up to play in the franchise tournaments, that's a recognition of their performance. So it echoes, obviously, the physio's roles and the importance that they do.
Well, there's a network as well, because when you play for a franchise overseas and there's something wrong with you have to then liaise with the home people and vice versa. So that network has become tighter in cricket all over the world. And I think most top people will know each other and know how they work.
Yeah. Well, so they'll sort of like pick. So like, for instance, someone like Andre Russell, who plays a lot of franchise cricket, he'll obviously recommend physios and people. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that when he leaves Jamaica, for example, he may go with an injury and will point out that these are the injuries he has.
Right.
A physiotherapist will take over his management. When he's finished, he'll send back something to our physio saying, well, this is what we've done, this is what he has, this is where we are. So that communication develops.
Yeah.
And that's become a tighter network globally now because of this franchise system
Yeah.
where they're playing all over the world. Now, the ICC has been very good too, because as I said, the ICC too has evolved with their policies. And so they give a lot of guidelines on minimum standards at matches, on what they should have, and concussion protocols, et cetera, et cetera. And so once again, that network has become tighter because everybody knows each other through the ICC as well.
Yeah.
I think it's been good for cricket in the last 15 years in terms of what the networking and the communication has been, as opposed to prior to that.
Yeah. Did it take, and obviously you mentioned there 15 years, had it been a long process, or with the ICC quite understanding and wanting to get this in place?
I think the ICC caught up and they
Right.
have certain guidelines, but the ICC is limited to their own tournaments. So bilateral tournaments remain bilateral tournaments with two teams. So, if West Indies is playing England, that's a matter between the West Indies and England.
Yeah.
Whereas in the World Cup here, we mandate that each team should have a team doctor and pay for it. And so every team has that. So that's point number one. Point number two, in the Caribbean perspective especially, is that we have some countries that are not very big. So, Jamaica, being the largest West Indian country by population, is 3.5 million, which incidentally is more than half of the West Indies population of 6.5. But we have countries like, where Kieran is from, which has 50, 60,000 people. So to have sports medicine specialists in those countries is a big achievement, because they themselves don't have the population base to necessarily fulfill a specialist of that caliber.
Yeah.
So we've had to do a lot of shifting around. So some teams may not have local expertise simply because they just don't have experts there, and that's because of their size and but that has changed over the years, and now we're finding that we're getting people in smaller and smaller countries, which obviously helps the population more than just the sporting population.
Yeah. Was there a kickback at all from any of the like you mentioned there, some of the smaller islands, because you mandated it to make sure, but obviously the budget possibly wasn't there to cover that sort of investment, maybe?
I think if there was a kickback, it was for practical reasons, as you pointed out, maybe budgetary and otherwise.
Yeah.
But once the franchise system started in West Indies cricket, we mandated that there be a sports physio. I think everybody bought into that quite well, because the center, the board was paying for it. As I said, initially the problem was that people who had been working in the field for years but may not have been specialized,
Right,
had to be incorporated because of their experience value.
Yeah.
When new people were bringing their friends in and so on, we had to explain, guys, would you really take your wife to a dermatologist to have your baby born? That sort of thing. So, but I wouldn't say there's a major kickback. And to be honest, there's been a lot of respect amongst the administrators for the medical field. From the players, it works both ways. Those who have had a sort of, level mind and so on, have had that respect. But then you do have those who will speak to people from overseas, get influenced by people from overseas, or feel that there's just nothing good in your own country. And as I said, you either can educate them or you try to facilitate them.
Yeah.
But the reality is, from, the best person to judge the medical standards of a region are the medical professionals of the region.
Of course, yeah.
So don't expect me to talk about how good a player is. That's for the professionals to deal with.
Yeah.
Likewise, a player should not be commenting on how good the medicine is without having researched it and gotten proper things. So if you're working off of whims, I really can't help that at all.
Yeah.
But happily, I would say, 90%, 95% of the players are very much in keeping with what's happening in the Caribbean.
Cool.
John, can I just jump in here? I could tell you two things about Dr. Mansingh before I ask him this question, right?
Okay.
You could judge a man partially by the words and stuff he says and his actions and stuff, but I think in Dr. Mansingh's case, you can even judge the quality of a man he is by his sons. He has two that I know about, two really, really top-notch level human beings for sons. So very, very proud of him. And then I remember a long time back now, every time I look at my right hand, I'm reminded of Dr. Mansingh, because I broke my finger the year before I was supposed to make the West Indies team, and I broke my finger in the first match of the season, and Dr. Mansingh had done a surgery on my right thumb finger. Never forgot it. And he was asking me, can you feel that? I was like, feeling what? And he had put some local anesthetic and stuff in my hand, and he did an amazing job. And I've never really had any problems in my finger from since that. So Dr. Mansingh, as he's talking about his work and stuff, I can tell you firsthand, I've experienced him as a person, his family, and what he's put out into the world as two very good young men, and obviously his work that has lasted me throughout my career. So I'm very thankful for Dr. Mansingh and the work that he's done in the region. But Dr. Mansingh, on a wider point, I would like to ask you, do you think that the players in the Caribbean are educated enough on sports medicine and the importance of, I guess, what it really entails, what they need to do on a daily basis to make sure that their bodies are getting, whether it be adequate amounts of rest, hydration, what they need to do in terms of recovery, practice levels, all these other things?
I think, Kieran, firstly, I'm humbled by your comments, and there's only one part that I'll agree with. And that is, you said that you only know of me having 2 sons, and I only know of myself having 2 kids as well. So this is different. Both of us don't know about it. But to answer your question, I think if I was to say across the board, the answer is probably not as educated as they should be, but certainly far better educated. However, what I'm pleased about is that our senior level, if I look at the physiotherapists and trainers that we have dealing with the West Indies men's team, the West Indies women's team, the under-19 team, they certainly impart that sort of knowledge from a position of authority. Now, when I go into the regional teams, I think most of them also are able to do so. Whether they do or not is a different story. I don't know the nitty-gritty. And if I was to go to the CPL, then once again, a lot of our physiotherapists in the past used to be from overseas. More and more, they're becoming local people. But of course, CPL is a 6-week wonder. So there's only so much you can impart. Now, one of the things that happens when you're just starting off as a young practitioner is you read a lot of stuff and you try to impart it without necessarily having the experience of its local grasp. So it's pointless me coming and telling people about taking a Greek yogurt diet with this salad and that salad, because that's not our West Indian diet.
Yeah.
We need to have Westernization of our nutritional protocols. And even then, we need to have an appreciation of what the West Indies is. So we had nutritionists in the past who would come in and give us meal plans, forgetting that the biggest roti and dal eaters in the Caribbean were Afro-Guyanese and Afro-Trinidadians, leave alone the Indo-Guyanese and Indo-Trinidadians, et cetera, et cetera. We're a very diverse region. So I think that appreciation has come across even more. But if I had, a bit more sway in the thing, what I'd want to be doing is educating our under-13 cricketers about this, so that when they come up, they have that knowledge.
Yeah.
So initially what we did was to try and educate our senior cricketers. Now what we need to do is to educate the senior and the junior, so there's a sandwiching effect. When they come up, they will bring the knowledge with them, and those at the top can pass the knowledge down until it becomes one.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, what the next emphasis is to educate. And it's not just about nutrition, not just about sport, but about being a professional athlete, how to invest your money, how to deal with agents, how, all that sort of stuff is something that I think we need to impart at a young age.
Yeah.
100%. I think that's not only something that needs to go to the athletes per se, but definitely to their families as well, because
Absolutely,
obviously in the Caribbean you find the mothers will be the one in terms of controlling the home front, and the fathers are the ones that would be taking, whether it be the son or the daughter, to cricket or track and field or whatever sport it is.
But I extend it, Kieran. I extend it to the community, because the community is so vested in the progress of young athletes in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
You, of course, know that very well from your own island. So Nevis, in particular, has produced some top-class people, but the entire country is vested in them. In Jamaica, when a Usain Bolt comes out of Trelawney, the whole village is vested. So the education, when I'm talking about that, it's not just about telling them this is what you should be eating, but learning from them what they feed the guys, and then coming to something where you can balance what the best is for the person.
Yeah.
But if you tell them you mustn't eat A, B, C, and it's part of what they've grown up on, it's not going to work.
That on a wider scale now, can you explain to me what's not happening in Jamaica in terms of cricket at the moment? Because you see, obviously the World Cup has kicked off. Jamaica's not taken part in terms of hosting games, which is very sad indeed, because of the history and the players that Jamaica have produced. But even on a domestic level, there's obviously no longer a CPL team. They don't really host regional matches as much. And you can't say that cricket in Jamaica is done, because you look at youth tournaments, Jamaica have won pretty much most, if not all, of the past under 15 and under 19 tournaments in the past 2 to 3 years. So I don't understand what's happening on the home front.
Yeah, so there's a mismatch between what we should be and what we're doing in Jamaica. And let's start with a few things. So the first thing I pointed out is Jamaica is 50% or more of the West Indian population. Therefore, we cannot afford to ignore Jamaica. The government seems to have taken a view that cricket is of no importance, because I think they don't understand the business of sport. So to have invested $2.64 million to host the World Cup would have given you an economic impact of multiples of that figure, but they just did not understand it. And they did not even bid for the second most viewed sporting event in the world. A sporting event that the USA saw fit to invest tens of millions of dollars into, because they saw some benefit to it. The CPL likewise. Now, in other countries, CPL teams are subsidized by the government to be in their countries. The Jamaican government doesn't do that. I'm not totally opposed to that because it is a private franchise and you're supposed
to. Yeah.
So the CPL is slightly different because local governments in the region have subsidized CPL teams, whereas the government of Jamaica has taken a view that they shouldn't. And I'm not entirely opposed to that because it is a private enterprise, it's not a national team, and you should be able to generate your own money. But let's look at it from a sociological perspective as well. Jamaica, as you know, has been a high-achieving sporting nation. And since 1948, let's go even further back. The first West Indian sporting superstar, I think, was George Headley, who announced himself in the world. He was a Jamaican who came in 1930. By 1948, we started dominating athletics and we won Olympic medals, multiple Olympic medals at the 48 and 52 Olympics. And since then, our Olympic journey has been well recorded. And I just want to point out that that's not a Jamaican thing. That's a West Indian thing. We were just ahead of it. So the fact that Grenada has a double gold medalist and St. Kitts has a world champion, et cetera, just talks about the richness of the region. Jamaica is just ahead of everybody else. But let's get back to cricket. In 1980s and 1990s, of course, and late 70s, we were the kings of cricket. And everything revolved around West Indies cricket. It was a new region. We just got independence 15 years before that, moving forward, because some countries, of course, got it much later. We're discovering ourselves as a nation, as a people, as a culture. And cricket was a driving force. But cricket demise started in 1994, and we can discuss why. So we lost to Australia, started losing our supremacy. Now, from the Jamaican perspective, in 1998, we went to World Cup football, FIFA World Cup. And that campaign galvanized Jamaicans around the flag, around the football flag. And everybody started backing football. And then when football started going down, our netball girls became number 2 in the world. And then since 2008, we had the track team just exploding with the Shelley-Ann Frasers and the Usain Bolts, and I could just spend the next 5 minutes calling out names. So when it comes to backing a winner, we always had a winner to back. Yeah. And West Indies became peripheral, and young sportsmen wanted to follow their passion with the other teams. Secondly, cricket used to be viewed on free-to-air TV and free-to-air radio for generations, if not close to half a century. But at that time, it started going to pay-per-view or to cable TV, to subscription TV. And so the general population could not watch cricket, but could watch other sports. Now, I'll tell you, in late 1980s, a new television station started in Jamaica, and they showed the Super Bowl live for the first time. And after the first quarter, they had to scrap it. They had to stop the broadcast because Jamaicans complained that you're bringing these foreign sports onto our TV. We don't want to watch it. That's alien to Jamaica. But by the 1990s, it became part of mainstream watching American sports, watching world sports. So when cricket was taken away from free to watch sport and other sports were there, young kids obviously would go towards that. Yeah. So you have the passion of football, you have the passion of other sports. Cricket is taking a second step. And on top of that, you're not showing it to the people. Then there was the economic aspect. So Kieran, you spoke about competitions. No young Jamaican has seen live Super 50 cricket in the Caribbean. I'm talking about our own competition. Because the sponsors demanded that the competition be held in Trinidad or in Barbados or wherever. And because the Jamaicans weren't sponsoring it, it never came to Jamaica. So when Red Strike Cup, a Jamaican company, took over first-class cricket sponsorship, it was played all over the Caribbean. But when certain companies took over the Super 50, they insisted that the matches be played in their territories. And therefore, no young Jamaican has seen a live regional Super 50 match for a generation. So that live cricket was taken away. Then you will realize that for years, we only had 4 test grounds in the Caribbean. And then Antigua came in 1980-something and it became 5. But you always got a test match. Now we have 10 to 12 international grounds in the Caribbean. You've got to bid for it. And what the West Indies Cricket Board has said is for the like India, England, you've got to bid for those tours. The Jamaican government saw no value in bidding for these tours. And you have to blame the Jamaica Cricket Association as well, because they should have prompted them. But the point is the business of sport was lost. So through all of that, cricket became a secondary sport. And in some respects, people said a dead sport in Jamaica. However, each time the West Indies would win even a test match, people would suddenly wake up and you hear the buzz about cricket, people talking about cricket. And this time, South Africa versus West Indies. I should also point out, for the last 10 years, when international cricket was played in Jamaica, nobody knew. The most ardent cricket supporters did not know there's cricket at Sabina Park because there's no marketing done by either the Cricket West Indies or by Jamaica Cricket Association, whoever the responsibility was with. So people who are ardent cricket fans, people who are chief organizers of 2007 World Cup, did not know that there's a test match or a one-day match in Jamaica. This year, when South Africa came, a set of youngsters decided that they're going to make sure that people know that cricket is being played in Jamaica, and they only had 2 weeks' notice. And it was backed by the Jamaica Cricket Association. And of course, I'm part of that association now, so I'm not taking credit for it, but I'm just saying that I know the inner workings. We were able to get crowds at Sabina Park that only CPL had attracted in the past.
Yeah.
And not only that, but the aim of some of these youngsters was to bring people to cricket who'd never been to cricket before. And it worked. People came and they had such a good time that they came to every single match. I don't even know if they know what was happening on the field.
Yeah.
In fact, the proprietors was told that you've got to keep quiet when the bowler reaches his run-up. And they said, we don't know what a run-up is. But they were at cricket. And that is what we've got to do. We've got to make cricket an event, not a sport. And the rest of the Caribbean, especially Trinidad and Guyana, have succeeded in doing that. People go to cricket because they want to have fun. And the fun may include watching cricket. But honestly, the fun is off the field.
Yeah.
And that's where sport has reached now. So we have a government that doesn't understand the business of sport. We have a government that rides on the coattail, and they don't understand cricket. And I say that because it's not just a matter of investing in monetary funds. When that under-19 team won the title that Kieran was speaking about, there wasn't even a congratulatory message from the government to say congratulations. That didn't cost any money. Yet when other sports come third in a regional junior competition, they get boosted by the authorities. So it's a disdain for cricket. And I point out another thing, which people will always challenge me on. Jamaican sportsmen have benefited more by making cricket their living than any other sport.
Any sport, yeah.
So our athletes, who are the top athletes, make millions of dollars, but the reality is the second tier make nothing. Yeah. Our footballers are semi-professionals except for a handful. All of the sports fall down, but in cricket, even at a regional level, you make a decent living. Yeah. So we should be promoting that as a lifestyle. Plus, the opportunities overseas for Jamaican cricketers are far more likely than they are for footballers, which is such a larger sport on the world arena that's harder to get into. So it's something that should be promoted as a way of life and so on. But I think what last week showed against that South African series, that cricket is not dead. No. And what we need to do perhaps is to get younger minds to take it on. And I think you will see that in the future. But the other side is, of course, only about 20% of the schools that used to play cricket are playing cricket now. Wow. So one of the emphasis of the board now is to take cricket back to the schools. It is an expensive sport. Let's not no. Work around that. Secondly, it's expensive not just in equipment, but in having groundsmen, pitches, and things like that. So you've got to make provisions for that. It takes a lot of space. It takes a lot of time. So we recognize that. But we're happy this year that the local television company sponsored the schoolboy T20 competition and televised it fully. With guess what? With third umpires. We don't even have that in our regional cricket.
No.
First class cricket doesn't have that. The amount of people, like Kieran will tell you, who've been robbed, their careers have been robbed because of improper decisions, should never happen in 2024 at a first class level. Every other country has third umpires. This schoolboy competition had it. So there's an emphasis, a reinvigoration of cricket, which I think you'll see will bear fruit so long as youngsters are allowed to drive it, because they understand the language of how to market, of how to popularize, and how to galvanize excitement around what really is a slow sport.
Yeah.
I'm glad you actually went down the route of youngsters driving the cricket forward, as you said, because of their understanding of what, I guess, their generation wants and how to get through to them. What I don't understand is you look at, for example, this big seminar that Cricket West Indies had with all the regional governments, etc., business entities. There was nothing sort of talked about in terms of, and as I said in a previous podcast, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be selling off a huge stake of West Indies board, but privatization of West Indies cricket, where you can sort of drive some sort of revenue into West Indies cricket that you can then go and, as you said, create a group of young personnel throughout the Caribbean, across the different islands, and help them to drive the game forward, get it back into schools. I think a next thing that we're lacking as well is enough qualified coaches in the region, because we don't talk about that as well. You know, we still play cricket in the manner of, all right, you know, guys just go and run 2 laps to warm up, bat for 15 minutes against pace, bat for 15 minutes against spin. You know, so there's no structure in that way in West Indies cricket as well. So we need to understand how to not only market our product domestically and internationally, and understanding the value of West Indies cricket being, I guess, everybody's second favorite team in the world, but how to generate revenue from that.
Kieran, you know, when you speak, you bring up about 15 points. It's hard to remember all these valuable contributions, but I know. So listen, you know, you're a product of it, so you can probably attest to a few things. Firstly, I fully agree with the privatization and bringing in private sector. I won't talk about the conference that was held recently because I wasn't part of it. But what I get out of it is that nothing new really emerged from it.
Right.
Last year, we actually had the Sir Frank Worrell Memorial Lecture that the Faculty of Sport puts on in Barbados. And the Prime Minister of Barbados, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, was this guest speaker. And what she brought out of that one, which the President of Cricket West Indies was present at, et cetera, were phenomenal commitments and ideas. Commitment of what her government was willing to back and ideas of where we should be going with that. But I'll park that for now. That's available online if anybody wants to see that lecture, because there are other things you brought up, Kieran. Our structure, and you're going to have to back me on this, I still believe that if you don't know how to bat properly, you're not going to succeed in shorter cricket. Our structure in West Indies cricket is to weed out batsmen.
Yeah.
Why? Because our under 15 competition used to be a 2 or 3 day competition. Years ago, they converted it into 30 overs per team, which meant that if you could stand up and bat all day, I have no use for you. I need somebody who can hit the ball. Our under 17 competition that was introduced after that is a 50 over competition. So if you can stand up and bat all day, I have no use for you. Get out of my cricket. I want somebody who can hit the ball. And that's because the coaches don't understand that hitting the ball is not the objective. It's to be able to construct an innings.
Yep.
Then you go to under 19 cricket. By this time, all those guys who could stand up and bat all day are disgruntled and have left the sport.
Yeah.
So for the first time now, you have 50 over cricket and 3 day cricket, but the guys who could play 3 day cricket can't. And this is the same cohort that goes to first class cricket, and all our first class matches finish in 3 days. Why? Because we have nobody who can stand up and bat all day. You've kicked them out long ago. So when Kieran Powell comes in and scores, becomes an immortal early on in his career, he has shown that he can stand up and bat all day. But right now, if you cannot play a cross-batted shot and hit the ball for 6, you're not a batsman. So with a timeline of what we saw today with West Indies versus Papua New Guinea, where the ball was a bit slower than they're used to, everybody got out to cross-batted shots with under edges to the keeper because they don't know how to bat a longer version of the game. Now, so I say that to say that there's one side of it is this sort of, you know, private enterprise and so on, but the other was the way the structure was made. Then we had what we call the pointless spinners. What do I mean by that? A fast bowler taking a wicket got points for their team in cricket, but a spinner taking a wicket did not in our regional competitions. So the spinner was pointless. And therefore, you did not evolve with that art. And so what I'm saying is there's a lot of structural changes we made that hurt our cricket badly. Now, we also have a scenario where the CPL, for example, all cricket between 10 and 30 overs in the Caribbean belongs to the CPL.
The CPL. Crazy.
So you cannot start a competition, play that number of overs without their blessing. Yet the CPL is, as they say, the biggest party in sport. It is not about development of West Indies cricket. It's about bringing overseas players that did enhance our cricket. But in reality now, the caliber of overseas players that are being brought in is not what they used to be in the past. But we'll still go for a third-rate overseas player than a second-rate Caribbean player and develop their skills, because those teams are looking to see where they can fit these players into their own franchises overseas.
Yeah.
And so we don't have an opportunity for cricketers between 23 and 27, 28, 29 to develop T20 cricket. We have this scenario of having an emerging player who's 19 to 23, but that's not when you should be learning T20 cricket. And you force them to play 5 games. So they're martyrs because they sit there and they're told, you were playing you because you have to be played. And then as soon as the 5 games are done, you're out. And as soon as you're over 23, you get kicked out. And that's when you need the help in development. Happily, they're talking about a regional T20 competition. And hopefully if that comes with the input and blessings of CPL, then we'll have development of local cricket at T20 level. So we have a scenario, we've kicked away our first-class people. We don't allow our T20 to develop. And in that, we expect us to produce world-class players. So the coaching is one aspect, and I think it has improved over the years, though I agree with you that there's a lot more that's happening in coaching. But if you look at it, a lot of our coaches are employed overseas as well. So there's some sort of recognition of what these guys are. But I think the infrastructure needs to change significantly. Now, I know I sat on the Cricket West Indies board for 4 years. I know that the main focus at that time was just financial stability. We were in such a precarious state that it was very difficult to look at anything more than how to balance the books in those days. That has changed significantly because spending has reduced, input has come in spite of lack of sponsors, we're still doing much better. We're now in a position that we can be looking at development. And so hopefully all of what you and I are speaking about, Kieran, will now come into place, or at least we can talk about it because we know they have the wherewithal to do it. If they don't, it's not because of lack of funds, which it was before. So we struck some poor deals in the past. We didn't recognize where the world was going. And the reality is we're far behind the world right now in where development of cricket should be vis-a-vis where we are right now.
So what are your takes then on, I guess, moving on from a Jamaican standpoint, a West Indian standpoint now on how the franchises can operate at a more optimal level? Because personally for me, as you would know as well with your son being a Jamaican player, I just don't think that there's enough cricket being played throughout the region. When you look at it as 7 first-class games, and at best, if you're lucky, you get 10 list A games per season, but yet you're on contract all year as a professional cricketer and you're working 3 months of the year. I think every other profession in the Caribbean would be, scrounging at the cricketers thinking you guys are working for 3 months and getting paid for 12,
That's
so
right.
how does
So
that
there's
work?
no doubt that if you're a professional cricketer, your job should be to play cricket, not to practice all of it. And so I fully agree with that. Now, the first class season, as I said, once again, I know the financial constraints we had in the past, especially with COVID. And I'm happy to hear that now we've got, at least seven matches, et cetera, going on. And one day maybe we'll get to see us playing in each other's territories. Because for the last few years, it hasn't been like that. Yeah. But there's a quantity of cricket and there's a quality of cricket. Even in Australia, the quantity is not necessarily much more at a first-class level, but certainly the quality is a lot more. So once again, you need to see how we can enhance the quality of our first-class cricket, perhaps with visiting teams. But if you notice, we have a lot more A tours taking place now. We have a lot more sort of non-international high-level cricket, which is good. And the female game, of course, I must point out, has improved significantly as well. But we have to right some wrongs. I mean, you spoke about the Jamaica experience this year. Jamaica played all their matches at home this year in first-class cricket. Now, for some absurd reason, they have an agreement where overseas teams stay in hotels, but home teams have to stay at home. Yeah. So when you're competing against Leeward Islands in Jamaica, at the end of the day's play, the Leeward Island players take a 20-minute bus ride to a hotel, recover in a pool, stay in a hotel room, eat hotel food, and rest. Whereas the Jamaican players would get in a car and drive, some of them, 2 hours back to their home, beat traffic, sleep at night, get up at 6 o'clock to get back to Kingston so that they'd get in time for the match, and are expected to rest and recover somewhere in between that. That absurdity has to change. It was an abnormal season because, the matches were restricted, but that's the reality of what happened in Jamaica cricket this year. And therefore, the performance below par was affected by aspects like this as well. But to answer your question, Kieran, about what do we do with the cricket, the Jamaica Cricket Association has to wake up and take responsibility. In the end, they're the custodians of cricket in Jamaica. And I think in the last few years, the efforts of spreading the game, popularizing the game, and getting people to come to cricket has not been as good as it should have been. Once again, in South Africa versus West Indies, you'd have seen that there are hordes of school children that were bussed in to come and watch international cricket. And I do think they had a great time. And what's more, which wasn't publicized, was that the Jamaica Cricket Association brought in, I think it was 60 high school coaches over the 3 days for them to enjoy the cricket and understand that this is something you want to come back to you and reintroduce into your schools. So that would be my answer. Let's go historic again. Cricket was played in the sugar plantations. Those are now finished. Cricket was played as an elitist sport where if you go back 100 years, it was the only way that the majority population could compete against the ruling minority. And so it was a way of upliftment. But we can't hang our sort of, quote on those shingles anymore, because it's no longer that.
Yeah.
So it's not sugar-based, it's not classist, it's not, master versus slave or whatever. This is now a professional sport by independent countries that have got to make it an equal playing field for everybody. And so club cricket has to be strengthened because sugarcane cricket is not there anymore. And that's where the investment has to take place, in schools and in clubs. The talent is there. The passion can be re-energized. It's there, but it just needs to be reawoken. And if you ask me what the future of West Indies cricket is, I think it's still very, very bright. If you ask me what the future of Jamaican cricket is, I think you're going to see some major changes in the next few years that's going to bring it back to where it should have been some time ago.
Good. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned there the T20 series that just took place. Mm-hmm. How important do you think that will be? Because you mentioned there about people coming to watch who probably never watched the game before, the success of it in terms of obviously from an attendance perspective. Do you think that will give, be the real sort of, reignite that sort of, cricket life that's left in Jamaica?
I think what was emphasized in this was that there's a need for it. Yeah. And what happened was that the board bought into the ideas of the youngsters who brought that concept to cricket.
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic that going forward, you're going to see a lot more of that. Jamaica has a lot of events. Jamaica has a lot of sporting events. What we need to do is have a lot of cricket sporting events. And that's what you can have.
Yeah.
CPL is a big loss because that's a natural way of bringing people to cricket who don't want to come to cricket, because it's just a party. But hopefully that too will be rectified in the near future.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. I wanted to quickly ask you as well, obviously, the time frame that you've been involved in cricket. What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen with everything, really?
I think the changes have been on two fronts. One is the philosophy of cricket, and the other is the standard of cricket. So cricket in the past was a fight for a cause. Whether, as I mentioned, some of the causes in the past, and then when we became independent, it was an identity cause. Yeah. That cause doesn't necessarily resonate with youngsters now. So we need to stop harping about the past and about, what it meant to somebody to beat England. Because right now, beating England should mean nothing more than beating any other country. Because this is about us winning, not about somebody else losing.
Yeah.
So one of the changes has been the change in the philosophy that youngsters now are playing it as a sport, not as a war. And so we've got to ignite a different cause in them. Whether it's a financial cause, the benefits of it financially, whether it's a pride cause, but it can't be the same fight that my generation fought or the generation before me fought.
Yeah.
The other change has been the drop in standard. Now, I will say that when we were kings in cricket, that might have been in spite of the board, not because of the board. We didn't have any massive development program. We just had a lot of talent that came out and beat the world. But what the world did was to find ways to beat the West Indies by bringing science and technology into cricket, which we ignored. Yeah. We ignored that we're naturally talented. Well, natural talent can only carry you a certain way now, because you need to bring science and technology through coaching techniques, through nutrition, through lifestyle. And these are not my words. These are the words of Kieran Powell that you heard a while ago, right? So they're the ones who are saying that these are the changes we need. So to me, the demise of West Indies cricket was the other change, because we didn't recognize what modern sport had reached.
Yeah.
And it's not that hard, because you just need to look at countries, the other countries. And I'm not talking about India's and Australia's and so on. I'm talking about even the lower level countries and how they've developed their cricket to surpass us. So Afghanistan now can play for national pride. We don't play for that because it doesn't mean the same. It means a lot more to the Afghanis now, as you can imagine, with their circumstances. So things change. I think the infrastructure is better than it's ever been, but there's still some issues. I think the franchise system was good for the players, but it dried up all funding from the territorial boards. So I can tell you from Jamaica's perspective, we used to hold weekend camps for our under 15, under 17, under 19 players. They'd come in every weekend for developmental camps right up to the competition for 3 to 6 months. When the franchises took over and the board paid 60% and the local franchise had to find 40% of the funding, all of the money went into supporting the franchise and dried up all developmental cricket. That was a seismic change. And that was because there was no funding from private sector in cricket. So you had to use all the money you had to go to maintaining your franchise. I think what I'd like to see is that the players still get a good deal. And as I told you, the health insurance benefits and so on are far better now. The pay is far better than it ever has been. So that's been another change, which I do not begrudge the players about. But as Karen said, to play for 3 months and to be paid for 12 months is a great place to be in. Yeah, but you know, so what I'd love to see is development coming back, and we need private sector help. And the reality is my generation, and I put my hand up, are not going to be able to get the private sector involved in this. We need the youngsters to come in with their new marketing. Apparently there's something called Facebook now that you can use to market things. And yeah. So and my kids will tell me even that's old stuff. But the point is, you know, it's a new generation that needs to take over. And we need to sort of hand over the reins and provide support rather than dictate.
What do you see the future of sports science?
So I think there's two things in sports science that have to be reconciled with. One is trying to produce a better athlete using science. And the other is to recognize that there are countries like Jamaica and other Caribbean countries that are producing world beaters using the same old traditional means. So we've got to reconcile the two, to use innate knowledge and talents and then enhance it with science. The fact that we had a race in Jamaica yesterday where number 1 and number 2 ran sub 9.8 in 100 meters tells you that things have changed.
Yeah.
But and the local guys and so on are using the same coaching techniques with the same coaches from, you know, 10, 20 years ago. It means that our coaches' innate knowledge is something you've got to tap into. It's not all about science and technology. And yet they need to be aided with scientific techniques to help them even further. So the long and short of it is that I think we've got to adapt and adopt science and technology, but maintain our West Indianism.
But how do you preserve a Glenn Mills, a Usain Bolt, this type of knowledge, a Chris Gale, these people, Courtney Walsh, etc.? Because I think that transferring of knowledge in the Caribbean is obviously not where it should be, and so too for mentorship. And I don't think that we understand the value of what we've been able to produce. So how do we preserve the information that these people have gathered over the years?
I think our greatness is our lack of arrogance, but that's also been our demise. So we have such greats in the world, but one of the problems, and I'm going to start with the negative. One of the problems, a lot of these greats are so stuck of, in my day, I used to do this, as opposed to using that to talk to a youngster and encourage them about their day and how they can apply whatever, you know. So there's a lot of innate knowledge. And when I spoke about coaching knowledge, Glenn Mills and obviously Stephen Francis are two people that I'd bring up immediately because they have produced Olympic medalists. You know, I'll give you a story about Glenn Mills since you brought up his name. For those who don't know, Glenn Mills is the coach of Racers Track Club and was the coach of Usain Bolt and so on. And I'd asked Glenn Mills once, who I'm very close to, that, you know, what was your best Olympics? He said, you know, Doc, 2008 was good because it was Usain's first, you know, we got a medal and so on. But see, 2012 in London, of the 6 medals, and what he was talking about was the gold, silver, bronze in the men's 100 and 200 meters. Of the 6 medals, I won 5 of them. Now, he'd won the gold, silver, and then the gold, silver, bronze. How do you translate that knowledge into a worldwide industry is what the question that you asked is. Yes. And to me, it has to be recording their stories, getting them to talk to youngsters, getting them to talk to our coaches to impart how they learn things. I'll give you another story about him. I was in a big sports medicine conference where I'd invited him as a speaker. And they showed Tyson Gay pulling up, getting a hamstring pull around the bend of the 200 meters. And people spoke about how we went around the 200 meters, this was it. And Coach Mills got up, put up his hand and said, no. The problem was the second stride after he left the starting blocks. He overstrode, then he was trying to compensate. By the time he got around the thing, he had lost his thing, done. And the people said, you know, we've shown this 100 times around the world and nobody ever picked that up. So we've got to find a way to capture our innate knowledge. Now, you said that already, so why am I repeating it? Because the solution to me is to get these guys to speak to our local coaches, to get them to have mentorship, to get youngsters from all over the world to come and just study how these guys worked. And a lot of relationship with their athletes, not just their knowledge, their relationship, because they're father figures to these guys. And I think the day we can do that, and so in cricket terms, it means getting these mentors, not to coach our guys, but to mentor them.
Mentor them, yes.
Them to say that when I was, you know, I remember there's an Antiguan cricketer every time he came back from a tour, he invested in land. Now, to me, that is as important a lesson as telling you how to play a forward defensive, because it takes a weight off of your head about what happens in the future. I want these guys to share their stories in an informal setting rather than appointing them as something and making them do things that they may not be comfortable in.
Yeah.
To me, that's so.
I was going to say, it's really, you're talking there. It's something that Kai's spoken so much about on this podcast, is utilising the importance of these key figures who featured in West Indies cricket over the past decade, and really sort of mentoring and plugging into their experience and knowledge before it's too late.
Yeah. One person I'd like you to interview, if you haven't in the past, is a guy named Powell. And I'll tell you why. Because it's not just that he became an immortal and that he played cricket at a very, achieved a lot at a young age.
Yeah.
But he actually ventured into aspects of cricket management and administration that people are only catching up to now. And I'm talking about agencies. I'm talking about looking at opportunities outside of cricket to bring into the area and so on. The point I'm making is that we need a lot more people of that generation to bring their ideas into where cricket should go if we're going to succeed. Because, as I said, my generation has done their bit, and I think now it's more guidance than execution. Yeah. So I do admire, and I'm not just saying that because he's here. I've said this off air to other people too, because we don't have that caliber of sportsmen who can think outside of the box. Yeah. And so when you do get them, they're the ones. So when he spoke about the greats like Courtney Walsh and all the rest, it's because they offer something outside of the box as well. Yeah. And it's a matter of how do we capture that? And it's maybe private sector has to do that. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to sort of finish a little bit by discussing the current World, the T20 World Cup that started today. How do you see the West Indies' chances?
Well, I'm always to the last ball going to back the West Indies as champions. And I was happy to say that I did predict it in 2014 against all odds. Right. 2016, I think, when we won the semifinals, definitely that was it. But I think we have as good a team now as we've ever had, and as good a chance now as we've ever had. Yeah. Yes, no home team has ever won the World Cup before, but there's always a first.
Always.
I think the consistency of this team, I think we're weaker in bowling than we are in batting, but the consistency of this team has improved in the last few years, and the caliber of players is actually a very good stock. But I got a scare today against PNG, against Papua New Guinea. And that's because, when you're used to a certain speed and a certain consistency and you don't get that, you can't adapt. And that's my little scare, because we have some people that we're going to have to adapt again. I watched Australia. I watched USA versus Canada yesterday. Yeah. And can I tell you, that was a high caliber match in terms of excitement. And to see these teams progressing was really happy. But coming back to West Indies, I will always back them, but I honestly believe that we have a chance here as good as anybody else. We just need to turn up on the day, especially the big days, and execute as we did in 2014 and even in 2016.
Yeah, definitely. And who do you see sort of being some of the key players in the tournament?
There are 11 West Indians playing on the team. There you are. We play as a team, not as individuals. Obviously, those guys who come out, but what I want to see is not one person shine. What I want to see is that if somebody fails, somebody else stands up, as they did today. If you look at the performance today, I want somebody else to stand up and say, hey, don't worry about it, I have you covered.
Yeah, definitely.
I want one team to shine, not any individual.
No, definitely. And how do you see the chances with the upcoming Test series in England against England?
I think that's going to be a bit more challenging, because our Test cricket is not as stable and as consistent as our one-day cricket or as a shorter cricket. And I think that, England is always a harder proposition. But guess what? With what the guys showed in Australia last year and the way that we have performed against England in the past, we're not going to be walkovers.
No.
But I still think it's part of a process. We're still in the process of developing our Test team. And if we win, I'll be the happiest man. But if we perform well and lose, I'll still be happy, because it means that it's part of the development.
Yeah, the progression and development. Because it looks likely it's going to be quite a young squad that come over as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think there's a good chance there of them learning a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 76 West Indies versus England in England was a pivotal spot for us. We just lost 5-1 to Australia in 75-76. Yeah. We had a hard-fought series against India and the West Indies in 76. We won that 2-1. And then we went to England, the grovel, when Tony Gregg said that they're going to grovel.
Yeah.
And it brought youngsters to the fore. They matured.
Yeah.
And if you mature a few guys on this tour, I think you're going to see the West Indies ascending very fast.
No, it's what we want to see, as Kieran mentioned. The West Indies, everyone's second team.
Yeah. I want them to be everybody's first team.
Well,
That's
true. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. It's been, from my perspective, I've really enjoyed listening to you, and from an education perspective and the knowledge you've brought, it's been really insightful. So thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to come on to the PowettPlay podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was very enjoyable.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Cheers.
Right.